Just a brief comment on today's first reading. Notice how St. Paul says that the thing that really is important is not the external signs or the observance of the old law, but rather faith. And he states specifically, the only thing that counts is faith working through love. So it's not just having faith, but putting faith into action. Faith working through love. In other words, the faith that is manifesting itself, which is motivated by love of God and love of neighbor. So putting faith into action. So it's not just by faith, but as St. James points out, faith without works is dead. So we need to put faith into action. Faith needs to be active in our lives, and this happens through love. Love is the motivating force. Now, in today's gospel reading, our Lord is invited by a Pharisee, and the Pharisee is shocked that he's amazed that our Lord did not wash before eating, before dinner. And it's almost like our Lord did this on purpose because he wanted to make them realize that they're very good at observing the external precepts of the law, but that doesn't justify them. This is what he's trying to convey to them. They need to be interiorly justified also. So in other words, it's good that they're observing the external precepts. Some of the things they like human traditions, such as the washings before eating, that's a good practice, but it wasn't a religious precept. It's not as if you're sinning. So our Lord wanted to make this very clear to them. So he says, okay, you're good at washing the outside of things, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. So they wanted to look good exteriorly, and most people do. I mean, think about the fact, in a given day, how many times do we look into a mirror? Men have to shave, we got to brush our teeth. Whenever we go to the bathroom, we probably look into the mirror, we got to comb our hair. We're concerned about our appearance, and it's important to look respectable, to look decent. If we've got dirt on our face, ideally we want to wipe it off, or we want to wash our face. But many, many people are very, very concerned about how they appear before other. And, even this health phase, everybody wants to be healthy and fit, which is good. But part of it is because they want to look sexy or they want to look attractive. It's all about the external appearance. And yes, to a certain extent, as I mentioned, it is kind of important. But what's even more important is how we appear interiorly. And how we are interiorly will affect the way that we act in regards to other people. So the interior disposition that we have is much, much more important because it pertains to the state of our soul. I mean, think of a soul that is in a state of mortal sin. They're incapable of true love. They're full of selfishness. They're full of rebellion. They're not going to have good relationships. I mean, they could have certain relationships to contend to a certain extent, but those relationships are much more likely to have conflicts and to break apart because the person is in a state of mortal sin. But what does a soul in a state of mortal sin look like? I mean, some spiritual authors say that when the soul is in a state of grace, God dwells in the soul, and it's kind of like shining brightly, almost like the sun. But in a state of grace, it's like black. It's dark. There is no light. It's like death. Yet the soul is still alive. So not just in regards to mortal sin, but all those other flaws and shortcomings and venial sins that we might be attached to or inclined to, the idea is we want to purify ourselves interiorly. So if you add it up, how many times you look into a mirror in a given day, I don't know, let's just say maybe 7 times, let's just say, and that's a low estimate. I think people probably look into the mirror much more often than that. And compare that to how many times we examine our soul when we do an examination of conscience. And the reality is that sometimes even when we do an examination of conscience, we don't really see ourselves as we really are. God gradually reveals things to us, and this happens through our life of prayer, and this is extremely good for us. I can't remember who it was, but there was an author who made this statement that men lost sight of their souls when the mirror was invented. So in primitive times, even during the time of Christ, people could look into, for example, a bucket of water and they could see themselves. But it's not entirely clear. It's kind of hard to see yourself. Or they had metal and they would polish that metal, but it wasn't very clear, so you would get sort of some vague image of yourself. But they didn't have mirrors the way that we have mirrors now that are very smooth and you can easily see yourself. And, even if you have a little thing in your eye, you could easily see it, right? They didn't have those things. So they didn't spend as much time looking in the mirror, looking at themselves. They weren't as concerned about their physical appearance. They were actually more concerned about their soul also. So today, because of the presence of mirrors, and I'm not just blaming mirrors for it, but we tend to be fixated on our external appearance. We tend to neglect the interior state of the soul. And when I say most of us, I'm not saying you and I'm saying people in general. This is the reality. So we do need to be concerned about this interior. And when a person is good, when a person is holy, it's kind of like that holiness radiates even through the visible appearance of that person. It's interesting when Saint Bernadette Soubirous, when she had her apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary, she said, when she saw the Blessed Virgin, she said the Blessed Virgin was the most beautiful woman she had ever seen. And it's not just because Our Lady was proportioned the right way, in other words, physically beautiful, but the beauty of her soul radiated through her. And the interesting thing is that when Bernadette beheld her, her own facial features changed, and she herself radiated or reflected some of that beauty. And this was evident to the bystanders who saw Bernadette during her interactions with Our Lady. So, and when you look at the saints, even Saint Andre Bessette, the saints have this beautiful, bright sparkle in their eyes. The eye is like the window to the soul. You can see there's so much goodness, so much humility within them, simply by their appearance. So if we want to look good, if we want to be acceptable, then we need to focus on the interior, more so than on the exterior. Yes, exterior appearance is good, but the interior is much, much more important. Today is the feast of St. Teresa of Avila, St. Teresa of Jesus, and it's good to know a little bit about her. Most of you know she was a great mystic, a great saint, a great reformer. She brought back the more strict form of observance of the Carmelites, and she founded many monasteries, many convents for her nuns. But she also wrote about the interior life. And she herself admitted that had it been not for the grace of God, she would have lost her soul, because even though she was in the convent, at one point she was just going through the motions. She wasn't committing herself to personal prayer, private prayer like meditative prayer or mental prayer. She was just going through the motions, the prayers that she had to say. And she said that was a very unfortunate state that she was in, but then she realized, and she worked on her interior life and grew in her relationship with God. And, one of her books, the Interior Castle, right? And she kind of describes it as kind of like the soul going to different mansions that all lead closer and closer to God. And in each mansion or in each room, there's things that the soul benefits from. And it's a great inspiration for many people. And it's also a reminder to us that when we think of the spiritual life, most people think, oh, well, I just got to say my prayers and I got to avoid sin and I got to try to do good. And it's kind of like, yeah, I have this kind of constant relationship with God. But no, it's not a constant relationship with God. The ideal is that we grow in our relationship with God. And as we grow in our relationship with God, we receive more benefits, more graces, more revelations, more love. And those who enter into the higher states of life, they experience the tremendous love of God. You know, at one point, St. Teresa of Avila said that God revealed to her how he created the universe. Very profound things that are difficult to understand, right? So she understood like in a more detailed way of how God created the universe, which we can only kind of vaguely grasp ourselves. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we understand that there's all these higher stages, it ought to motivate us to seek those higher stages and to apply ourselves more zealously, more earnestly to the interior life, to beautifying our interior disposition or how we look interiorly. So, we might ask the question, we make the effort to look good exteriorly, but what do I look like inside? What are the thoughts going through my mind? Do I judge that person? Do I have a revulsion against this other person? And am I selfish? Am I greedy? Am I envious? Am I jealous? Am I impatient? Like, we can go through a whole list of these things. So what do I look like on the inside? Do I purify myself interiorly?